We'll head to David Seymour now. Massive changes to the Resource Management Act. What does this all mean? And also, does Act 1 out of the Paris Agreement? I see Winston's talking that up. But this, the RMA changes. We've been promised RMA changes for decades, for a number of years. And our population has grown, hasn't it? But the infrastructure has crumbled. There's been all sorts of people and groups using the RMA to weaponise it and using it to stop you building a house and all sorts of things. They come on in with the local committee and stop you because there's some rear spiders at the end of the section. All these sorts of things. It's been a complete nightmare. David Seymour joins us now. David, g'day. Welcome to the show.
G'day.
You said it's the most important work the government's. You said it's the most important work the government's doing. In what way? I mean, is this finally going to change things?
Yeah, first of all, if I was to sum up New Zealand, it's the greatest piece of real estate on the planet, but it's very difficult to build a home, and it's very difficult even for councils to get the consent for the water treatment plant, the pumping station, the road, even the bus stop, and all the other things that connect homes together into cities and connect the people who live in them with opportunity, by which I mean jobs and education. So if you can't build the infrastructure, you can't build the homes, because we've decided as a country that people's right to object is greater than people's right to actually build something, then we end up being a pretty depressing sort of a place. And in particular, you look at the number of people leaving. That's not just right now, that's a long history of New Zealand, unfortunately. I think it's largely because if you're a young person in New Zealand, it's pretty difficult to see that pathway to a property-owning democracy. I mean, let's say you do all the right things, you listen to your teacher, you do your homework, you end up going to a university or a trades training, and you come out, you've got tens of thousands of student loan. You look at a deposit on a house that looks anything like your parents had, and you find that it's 10 times your income at minimum after you deal to your loan. Now, you can't blame younger people for saying, gee, this thing's kind of rigged against me. It's not going to work. So when I say it's the most important thing the government will do, changing the basic rules about who has a right to develop their property and who has a right to object is the most powerful thing we can do to help realise the potential of this country, that it's a great piece of real estate, but it needs a bit more habitat for actual humans.
Yeah, I wonder, will this make a fundamental change to things like house prices? Because if you don't see house prices and the pace at which houses can be built, then what's the point, right?
Well, I believe it will, and the reason for that is that over the last decade that I've been in Parliament, I've looked very closely at what the history of our land use planning is, and without going on the whole history of it, I mean, up until 1926, when many of the most desirable and picturesque parts of New Zealand were built, there was actually no planning law. Then we got the Town Planning Act. 1953, we spread the misery to the country with the Town and Country Planning Act. In 1977, it got revamped and made bigger. And then in 1991, we got the RMA. Now, the reason I lay that all out is that for most of our history, about every 20 years, there's been a major reform of planning. And the problem with the RMA is we've actually had it for 35 years, and it's got more and more complicated. It's now over 900 pages, basically, of hoops that people have to jump through to get anything done. What's also interesting is that at each time, there was a particular zeitgeist, if you like, that drove the changes in planning laws. And in the late 80s, early 90s, it was the time of the sustainability movement, the time of the Rio conference. It really was the emergence of the environmental movement. And the zeitgeist we put into our Resource Management Act was that basically, if anything looked like it might even be vaguely environmentally concerning, then it would have to be tied up in red tape and probably not happen. We're now putting in place a new zeitgeist, and that is the zeitgeist of property rights. The simple principle of the new resource management laws is if it's your property, you've got a right to do it, and the objection rights fall to people who can show that the enjoyment of their property will be harmed. Now, that is a fundamental shift in the underlying premise, just as with previous times that there's been a major shift in planning laws.
Over the years, I've been presented with by numbers of people in the different shows and places I've worked over the years of iwi groups having a say in over someone's property. So they will travel across the isthmus in Auckland. They'll travel 60, 70 k's, a group of them, to find some rare spiders at the bottom of the property, and that holds things up. And there's money has to change hands. Will that go? What's the iwi considerations here, and how's that going to be affected in this? Because some of the stories that I've had presented to me over the years from different people, it's heartbreaking because they've ended up being stood over effectively.
Yep. So again, and that's why this return to, is it a return? It's a new thing. Putting property rights at the centre of resource management law is so critical, because as a local MP, I get people who say I can't do something because someone from far away, maybe it's iwi, maybe it's just some people from across town are telling me that I can't do it because there's so many hoops I have to jump through in this 900 pages. Yet on the other hand, I sometimes get people who will say they're putting something up right next door that's going to substantially affect my enjoyment of my property with shading or whatever. And I don't actually have a say on that. So bringing it right back to, is it my property? Can I deliver it? Yes. If you want to object to that person, can you show that it's affecting your enjoyment of your property? That wipes out a huge proportion of the objections that are currently made. And then this is really a cultural shift. I mean, we've got to decide. We're either a country where everybody has a right to object to everything on just about any grounds, or we're a country where you've got a right to develop your property, and if you want to object, you have to show it affects your property rights.
Right. So will this stop iwi then coming onto your property and saying that there are special spiders or special lizards or anything?
Well, there's always going to be environmental protection, but in relation to iwi, it's going to the emphasis goes back to a lot of iwi own property. If they can show that your development's going to affect their enjoyment of their property, then sure, just like anyone else, they can object.
Sure.
But the idea that the resource management system is somehow an extension of this treaty industry, where people have different rights to object, different rights to have a say, that is something that our government is rolling back in many ways, the Treaty Principles Bill being perhaps the highest profile, but this resource management law will do some similar things.
This is overdue, David. This is fundamental to go to the heart of what it means to be a New Zealander and to build and to get on with your private property rights. Can this be passed under urgency in any way, or is this not the sort of legislation that should go under urgency and should be properly tested through Select Committee and so forth?
It won't go into urgency. It will be done before the election. So you would have seen the announcements yesterday by Simon Court from ACT and Chris Bishop from National, who have worked together on this. They're going to spend the rest of this year getting the actual drafting done, because that is a challenge, it's fair to say. Then at the end of this year, the law will be revealed in its final form and go before Parliament, and then Parliament will debate it. There'll be 6-month Select Committee, and we'll pass it in the middle of next year before the election.
Will we see house prices fall as a result? And how will we know?
I don't think that you're going to see, you certainly won't see them fall this year, and you won't see them fall next year. But what will happen is that over the next decade, you will see a shift in the rights that people have to use their property. You'll see more development going ahead. It will be easier for people to develop their property, and that will make us a different country, where younger people in particular can actually see that pathway to a property owning democracy, and you'll get far less people upset, disturbed, protesting all sorts of other things, asking for wealth taxes, if they believe that they're actually invested in a society where they too can get ahead. So no, you won't see a house price drop this year, next year, but as these laws come into effect and as the councils start behaving differently under this law, you will see a transformation in New Zealand, I believe.
Can we entrench it in any way? So if Labor gets back to office, dear God, if they get back to office, that they can't just repeal it?